a lot of concern in the industry, and people were a little bit puzzled that how would they really finance all these investments and still remain afloat. The initial days of COVID and seemed to indicate that things would get worse because supply chains got disrupted, routes got disrupted. On the airline industry side, flights were banned. So essentially, there were aircraft sitting on the ground, which is by far the most expensive way to run an operation because airlines only make money if the birds are in the sky.
Welcome to the Blue Circle, an exclusive keynote address for our members. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking platform for industry professionals that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, renewable energy, real estate, logistics, healthcare, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for industry professionals, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker and Blue Circle member, Mr. Madhav Thapar. He's the Vice President leading South Asia, Middle East, and Africa for C.H. Robinson Global Forwarding. He joined C.H. Robinson in 2018, and prior to that, he had over three decades of senior management experience in C-level positions with leading multinationals in the field of global logistics across the Indian continent, Asia Pacific, and Africa. Mr. Thapar is currently responsible for driving growth and continued alignment across the region. And for today's topic, Mr. Thapar will be discussing shift in global freight forwarding market, what lies ahead. I request Mr. Thapar to please begin the session.
Thank you, Gautam, and many thanks to Blue Circle for giving me the opportunity to address the session. And thank you to everyone who's dialed in the middle of what is Friday afternoon. So hopefully we can have a nice discussion over here, and it will bring some value to those of you who have taken the time out to be with us today. The topic that we have today, which is about the shifting trends in global forwarding, is a very relevant one, because I think that this sector has seen the most unprecedented volatility over the last 2 to 3 years. I would like to take you a little bit back in time before I talk about the future, because it is relevant to understand the various factors that have brought us to where we are today before we really understand what trends could impact us going forward. So if I go back to the scenario pre-COVID, when nobody knew that the pandemic was imminent and would be of the intensity and the magnitude and the duration that ultimately transpired, we were in an environment where the logistics industry, and especially international shipping, because my focus is really more on international ocean and air cargo movements, was actually struggling with a very low freight regime. Everybody was competing for the same piece of the pie, and market forces had brought freight rates down to levels which were very difficult for airline and shipping line companies to actually sustain themselves. And at the same time, they were looking at a scenario where a lot of investments were being called for. So technology is something that's obviously been on the agenda of most foresighted organizations in our business for some period of time. But there was also a huge push towards becoming more environmental friendly, upgrading equipment or bringing in new equipment, be it new vessels, new aircraft that have lower emissions, shifting to greener fuels, which meant major modifications that needed to be done. And there was, I think, a lot of concern in the industry, and people were a little bit puzzled that how would they really finance all these investments and still remain afloat. The initial days of COVID and seemed to indicate that things would get worse because supply chains got disrupted, routes got disrupted. On the airline industry side, flights were banned. So essentially, there were aircraft sitting on the ground, which is by far the most expensive way to run an operation because airlines only make money if the birds are in the sky. Right? And even when some kind of operations resumed, there were no passengers flying for sure because of the various restrictions. Shipping lines had to majorly adjust their routes because depending on which country had a lockdown, and China, which is the biggest supplier and perhaps the biggest stakeholder in international shipping, had the worst of situations, and therefore their ports were getting locked down and the government was being extremely strict, and everybody thought that doomsday is nigh. But I think one thing that distinguishes our industry, it's one of the oldest professions in the world and it has survived through many circumstances, is the sheer resilience and adaptability and the need to get things done because of the overall objective that if goods do not move, then the world comes to a standstill. Right? And this soon came into play. And I think that there was, again, rapid adaptability, a lot of flexibility, getting into virtual working modes. Some real heroes who, in spite of the COVID crisis, if they had to be physically present, took risks with their lives to get into the field and do what needed to be done. Right? And the result was that though there were disruptions to supply chains, they slowly started to, I wouldn't say slowly, in fact, they rather rapidly started to come back to at least a maintenance mode and to make sure that what needed to move. And there was the additional imperative, of course, that there were a lot of essential stuff that needed to move, including the vaccines when they came in. And before that, the sheer medicines, the oxygen, and the regular goods. Right? So we had a situation where the industry responded and the movements began. And then we very quickly got into the next scenario. And maybe here, we have some nice illustrations. I don't believe in very wordy PowerPoints. So these are more pictorial representations of what the scenario was for all of you to be able to maybe visualize things better, but I will talk through many of them. So I think what happened was that as things started to stabilize and the world became, adjusted to the fact that this is longer than what we thought it would be, everybody started to cope, and government stepped into play and started to, give subsidies to kickstart economies. In many countries, there was, for example, the US, which is one of the big markets anyway for everyone globally. There was actually individual dole-outs given to people to continue to stimulate consumption. And therefore, we were rapidly then moving into an environment where, contrary to popular perception, consumption actually started to rise. And there was a reason for this. The rise in disposable income with many people was one factor. As I said, government subsidies, and I don't know if you need to look at the next illustration here. the government subsidies and the individual sort of roles were one part of it, but there was also the very human factor that people were stuck at home. They were not able to commute to work. They were not able to travel for leisure, right? They were not able to go to the malls or to the cinema or to the restaurants or whatever else we would normally do, and therefore they had disposable income in their hands. And I guess you know there was very little to do in terms of entertainment or keeping oneself engaged, bound as one was by the restrictions, but to start spending that disposable income. And there was a rise in consumption, which led to a lot of consumer goods being bought. E-commerce companies, delivery companies started to flourish, but at the back end, they still had to be supplied with the products. So during COVID, there was a sharp rise in consumption, and there came a time when freight rates started to rise because of, again, the demand and supply factor. So the supply was really low because vessels, aircraft, routes were disrupted, or there was not enough capacity available for the reasons I explained earlier, and the consumption had started to rise. So this led to what was quite clearly an unnatural inflation in freight costs across the world. The business could still be sustained because economies were buying big time, right? And the consumers were buying big time. But the products had not changed. So it was still the home furnishings, it was still, various consumer items that were moving, and they were moving at a substantially higher cost than perhaps the price of the products could justify. So I think that the ratio of logistics cost to the cost of the product got seriously, impacted and distorted. And it was quite obvious that there would come a time when this would need to see some kind of correction, because we had gone from one extreme of a very low freight regime where the carriers were struggling to sustain themselves and to make necessary investments, to a situation where the freight rates had gone to a level where manufacturers over a long period of time would struggle to position their goods in the marketplace at these high freight costs. Now, we seem to be over one phase and moving into another rather rapidly. Clearly, the lockdowns have gone, one hopes for good. What this sad experience has taught us is that we can never take anything for granted, and hopefully there are no further pandemics. But for the moment, it appears that the world has learned to live with COVID. It's not gone away, but with increased vaccination, medication awareness, we at least do not see, except in pockets, again, China seems to be still following a very strict regime, but we do not see the same kind of lockdowns and disruptions that were rampant till maybe a year or so ago. Meanwhile, I think with people returning back to their normal activities, normal spending patterns have also emerged. So people now do have the options to travel, and there's even revenge travel taking place because people who've not moved for so long are now anxious to get going again. Business travel has picked up again. The normal things that people spend on, physical shopping, going to the theater, going out to restaurants, all that has started. So there's less, and the subsidies have, of course, stopped because they cannot continue forever. So there's less disposable income. It's a more normal income that is available. Some of the suppliers have overstocked, right? Because you can't really time when these things change. So there's less demand for fresh products, and therefore generally supply seems to be slowing down, and also demand, right? In fact, if you look at the Western world, and especially the US and Europe, which are still the largest markets, there's actually now open talk about a deep recession that might last for some time. On the other hand, the supply side is actually getting better. So with aircraft coming back into play, belly capacities are back. In order to sort of cope with the scenario where there was a shortage, like shipping lines ordered more containers, airlines ordered more freighters. These are things that are very much there, right? Larger vessels, the 20,000 ton TU capacity vessels, are ordered and they were delayed for some time or slowed down because of production, but they are coming through from 2023 onwards, and therefore there's a surge on the capacity side. So again, we will have a mismatch where probably more capacity comes back, but the supply reduces because the demand has slowed down for this period in time. There's therefore a question that I'm normally asked: does this mean that we will go back to pre-COVID freight rates and the market will crash again? And I would say that the truth is probably somewhere in between. I've already said that the freight rates, for the reasons we discussed, did go up to abnormally high levels, and that has seen correction. But I think it would be wrong to believe that we can go back to pre-COVID levels, because those levels were simply too low. And therefore, the market should hopefully, in the interest of the long-term, uh, you know, the long-term stakes for every participant, settle down at a more mature middle level. Nothing is going away on the investment imperatives. I think, if anything, the COVID scenario has very clearly taught us that the only thing that sustains us through these kind of crises is the ability to be able to work virtually and therefore to have a very strong tech base. Right. So at C.H. Robinson, for example, we never slowed down our investment in technology. We stayed with the plans that we had announced and even accelerated them. And I am sure that even in future, right, we will continue to do the same, because there is a clear lesson here that you have to be technically always ahead of the curve if you want to survive these kind of crises. Similarly, on the environment front, very clear, when there were lockdowns, we suddenly saw the birds coming back, the plants flowering, everybody breathing clear oxygen, right? And that just drove home the point that what have we actually done to the world and the environment over the past few years? We've been rampant in flouting environmental norms. Global warming has come about, weather patterns have changed, and just that little break when the world shut down, you saw nature really welcoming it. And that, I think, really brought home the fact that we can't lose these lessons. And going forward, if it means that we have to have better equipment, use better fuel, reduce emissions, we cannot stop investing in all of this. Every company today that is globally present, and certainly we ourselves, have a strong ESG agenda driven from the very top. And that is because we need to do something for future generations as well. Now, none of this happens for free. And therefore, to the point that there will have to be enough money available in the businesses to continue these agendas, because these agendas are a matter of survival more than anything else, right? Without reaching a level where the other side of the partnership, which is the customers, the manufacturers, the importers, find it difficult to sustain the cost. So there's a balancing over there. The recession is complicating things, but I think that the good news here is that we've seen in recent cycles, and I was at a distinguished economic forum some weeks back, and the findings there were very much the same, that the cycles that follow recessions and then recoveries seem to be changing in favor of the recoveries. So the recessionary periods are becoming shorter and the recoveries are becoming faster. Right. So there's, I think, a lot of hope that things will recover faster. There's also the fact of the geopolitics and the geographies we sit in. So a lot of this has been aggravated, of course, by the Ukraine war, the fuel crisis that is impacting life in Europe, where they have very severe climatic conditions and can obviously not face an energy crisis. Right? So these are all other factors. But if you really look at the future, I think India still continues to grow. It's very upbeat. If we look at the rest of the region that I represent for C.H. Robinson, which is Middle East and Africa. Africa is a sleeping giant that will awaken. They had a really tough time through COVID, but this is the time for them to find their spotlight on the world stage. The Middle East is simply incredible. So those of us who've had a chance to travel or even see what's happening over there through various documentaries and various media forums, the growth in UAE continues unabated. They had a slowdown in the middle. They've come out of that, and they are now very much the hub of the future. Saudi Arabia is simply exploding with their Vision 2030 and their projects, which each project is larger than the size of some economies for that matter. So there's a lot that will happen in the future. Yes, we may have a period where things will slow, but I still believe that the midterm to long term prospect for our region is very upbeat. We should not slow down our investments. Uh, we have to continue to be geared to face the future, to deal with the demands of the future. We have to remain environmentally responsible. And that is what we are committed to at C.H. Robinson. And of course, technology, technology, technology. There's no way that we can at any time slow down on technology, because that is all that will help us in the long run to deal with any future crises of this nature if they do come up, God forbid. So I think, in summary, if I look at the future, I see more capacity coming in, both by air and ocean. I see freight rates stabilizing at a medium level, which is fair to all stakeholders and still hopefully enables the investments that need to be made. And I see enlightened companies continuing in a strong way with their agenda for upgrading technology, for looking at the environment. And I see a shift in patterns where the focus will now change away from just simply cost to working with organizations that can deliver these agendas and can be partners for a sustainable future together. And that's what we aspire to do at C.H. Robinson. So thank you again for a very patient hearing. And I hope that gave you a little flavor of the topic that was assigned to me today.
Beautifully put, Mr. Thapar. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'll quickly get on to the Q&A session so we don't waste any more time. You spoke of the geopolitical trade coming across, and there are two questions, and even the war impacting the supply chain, global supply chains. There are two questions from our members which have come. I'll go one by one. One is that how has the rise in the trade agreements between countries impacted this freight forwarding market? And two is Germany and the United Kingdom are the key markets for sea freight forwarding in Europe. How does Brexit and the Ukraine-Russia war impact freight forwarding sector?
Okay, so let me take the first one and then I'll come to the second. So if we talk about the trade agreements, I think with the geopolitics, obviously there are major shifts taking place now in the alliances and how trade is going to be structured in future. These changes do not take place overnight, because if you see, the major suppliers to the whole world over the years has been China, and their manufacturing capacity is so massive that even if there are some political considerations or there are situations where people want to move away from China, it's physically not feasible to do so in entirety, because nobody can really replace overnight their complete manufacturing ability, right? So I think in fact, what has hurt the world for some time also is the fact that because of these lockdowns, China supplies have been affected, and it's also affected shipping big time, right? So I think for clearly China will remain a force for the foreseeable future, right? In the past also, there has been some shift of trading to other Southeast Asian countries, primarily Indonesia and Vietnam. But again, the capacity issue comes into play, that how much can they really take on with their relative size. India has been somewhere sitting in the middle because there's always an expectation that when there's a geopolitical shift, that India will sort of benefit out of it. Uh, and I would say we have to some extent, but not to the extent that we would have all hoped. Because again, the pace of our infrastructure development, the pace of our generally being able to gear up to the kind of capacity a 1.4 billion nation should have, uh, has so far perhaps not been optimal. Uh, there's a lot of hope. There's a new national logistics policy that's been announced. There's focus from the government. But I think we just need to accelerate faster. What will emerge now is trading, first of all, between new markets. Uh, I just talked about the Middle East, and I think a very important alliance going forward, which is also very apparent from the way that the leaders of these countries have been interacting and signing pacts, is between India, UAE, USA, and Saudi, and to some extent Israel as well, right? A little delicate there because Israel and Saudi have their own complexities. But I think people are learning to rise above old matters and to look at things more from the trade and commerce angle. And this becomes an extremely important trading block for future development. I talked about Africa reawakening because they still need a huge amount of infrastructure before they can transform into manufacturing economies. So still a lot of projects, consumption, raw materials that need to flow into Africa. There's also been a shift in the fact that the crisis has taught countries to rely a little bit more on nearby markets. So I think trade within Asia, intra-Asia, trade between Latin America and the US, these are shifts that are happening from the lessons learned from COVID. That is it really wise for the US to import something from half the world away and not look at closer by markets? And why are the Asian countries, not able to trade more with each other and they always depend upon Europe? So I think that that's what's driving these new alliances, response to such situations, new political alliances and preferences coming up. And it will take some time to have an impact because, as I said, the things are so skewed in the world of supply and logistics that it does not change overnight. But the trends are definitely there and it will happen for sure in the midterm. Now coming back to the Brexit and the question about Germany and Europe. Uh, Brexit was always a mixed kind of thing for the people in the UK. I think it was driven more by sentiments, emotions, maybe not so much by commerce, right? And nobody had, of course, at that stage anticipated that there would be COVID and there would be further complications or there would be a Ukraine war. I think these matters have seriously queered the pitch for the UK at the moment because energy is something they are deeply dependent upon with their climatic conditions. And obviously, what happened in Ukraine, they couldn't anticipate it, but it's not helping. The other problem is that after Brexit, they actually short now our labor force, right? In the Western world, there's a real challenge in getting people back to work. People are now used to either working from home, working remotely, working from anywhere, or not working at all, right? So there's a shortage of people just to keep things going. I just the other evening was, meeting a fellow colleague at one function, and he's made 3 trips to the UK in recent times, and he said every time it's been a nightmare because immigration lines are huge because there's nobody to man the immigration counters. The underground keeps going on strike, so public transport gets disrupted. Trains and flights get cancelled for no other reason that there are just not enough people to operate them, right? The story he told me, and don't quote me as a fact on this because it's a story, right? But he told me that they actually had to open up temporary visas and get in people from East Europe for a limited period of time because there was no one to slaughter the pigs in the piggeries, right? And there was no meat available over there. Due apologies to the vegetarians, but you know that the British, live on meat. And there's a certain cycle in which these farms have to produce meat. And if there's nobody to do that, there's no supply to the thing. So that's what's happened over there. I don't know what they're going to do about it, because there will be political compulsions that go beyond. But from the commerce perspective, it's not been so far a good experience for them, and that's why they are really struggling with perhaps the worst inflationary trends on the one side in terms of pricing, and generally on the other side a shortage of labor and the ability to come out of this. Right. Germany has always been the hub of Europe, the strongest manufacturing country over there. But the problem is, again, energy and fuel impacts everybody, right? Cost of production impacts everybody. The UK was also a major market for other European countries, and now with all the new formalities of shipping up and down, there's a problem there. The US is a problem because they are going into overstocking and recession. And I think Asia would prefer to trade with themselves because they can no longer afford inputs from these expensive Western countries unless they're absolutely vital. So I think Europe is in for a big challenge. The impacts of the Ukraine war are going to be, and the war itself has extended much more than anyone expected it to. So the impacts are going to be far-reaching.
Thank you. Very well answered, Mr. Thapar. Really enjoyed it. I'll move on to the next question quickly. You spoke of, before I get into the question, you spoke of how C.H. Robinson is working on technology innovation on a day-to-day basis. So I believe the question is coming from there. And Rakesh Manotra is highlighting that world over, countries are observing faster technological integration in this area. In India, 80% of freight moves by road, and the trucking industry is highly fragmented. How is India adopting technology to improve efficiency? And if I may add, what is the role of C.H. Robinson in this space as well?
Okay, so again, let me answer that in two parts. The easier one is to talk about C.H. Robinson first. So C.H. Robinson's DNA has been in the industry, in the trucking industry. We were the Uber of trucking in the US long before Uber conceptualized, what could be done with passengers. And anything that's in that domain is obviously driven by a very strong technological backbone, right? However, having said that, in the Indian context, we have always focused on international forwarding, and we have subcontracted our local needs, and we are not really the big domestic players over here. So there has been no need to bring in the global technology that we developed in the US into the Indian market. Also, because of the very reason that the person posing the question mentioned, they're so fragmented and there are so many players, it's very hard to have a common platform across. Having said that, because it's fragmented, because the needs have certainly come up, especially driven by the explosion of e-commerce, what you find is that each transporter in this segment, and I'm by no means the expert on this, as I've disclaimed in the beginning, but what they have done is that they have tried to find solutions by buying off-the-shelf individual kind of technology packages that don't necessarily tie in with the larger ecosystem. One of the key things of or the key drivers, let's say, of the national logistics policy that was just announced a few days back was to envision bringing everything onto a common tech platform. Because I think that the government has realized that the only way to tackle India's infrastructural problems, to bring us manufacturing-wise, we have great manufacturing. There's a great opportunity because, as I said, of the geopolitical shifts. What normally lets us down is our infrastructure and our very fragmented technology. So the logistics policy actually is aimed at bringing everybody onto a common platform with a backbone of technology. Now, how long it will take to translate into reality is a different matter, because I think these policies by nature, when they are announced, are visionary, right? There's a lot more that goes into actually translating them into practical reality, into the kind of very complex ecosystem that we have today. So we cannot expect miracles overnight, but I do believe that it's a step in the right direction, because it's now showing that the government recognizes this as a challenge and is wanting to do something about it.
Understood. Thank you. I'll move on to the next question. And there are actually two questions by Mr. Nair. He's asking what you've briefly mentioned during your presentation. So I'll ask you the first one. He says, are current freight rates going to be the new normal? Will they also be impacted by inflationary pressures? The second question is saying, which you spoke about the African market, is that we've heard Africa awakening for a long time now, but that doesn't seem to have happened. What will be
Yeah.
the catalyst this time?
Okay. So again, let me take the questions in sequence. Uh, so the first one, I wish I had a crystal ball. It's very hard to predict where this thing will settle, right? But as I said, you know, depending on the sector we are talking about, the mode we are talking about, but the rough average actually was a 4x increase in freight rates over the last 2 years, right? We have already seen a decline to maybe a 2.5x, right? The X is out of the equation because I talked about that earlier. If that happens, the industry collapses, right? My gut feeling, and don't hold me to this, is that we might see another correction of 10 to 15%. And then, it will have to stabilize, because if it doesn't, then we have bigger problems. The whole progress will get slowed down. So I think, and this will also vary from sector to sector, obviously driven by demand and supply. Inflationary pressures are less of the issue. Uh, I think the bigger issue is actually oil pricing. How does that move? Okay. Typically, when there's a recession in the Western world, oil prices start to come down, which is what is happening today. But then there's the supply side of it. So, we already had an issue with the Ukraine-Russia war. Uh, if there's any other such geopolitical crisis, then things can move. It's a really volatile world at the moment today, which is very difficult to look at, right? Uh, you also have the story, as I said, of overstocking, over anticipation of demand. On the other hand, which does have its impacts on the supply side. So I think a lot of factors in play, very difficult to predict exactly where this is going to stop, if that is the question. But I do expect that, barring any other totally unexpected circumstances, which are geopolitical or pandemic wise in nature, God forbid, right? Things should pretty much settle in the next couple of months, and that would kind of become the new normal for some time in future. The second question was about Africa. So I think Africa has been beset by a series of unfortunate circumstances. Uh, COVID is, for example, something that really hit them hard and even put them back behind the world. Because see, it's a very difficult geography. It's not a geography that can be managed by remote, right? It has not reached the level of sophistication where things can happen virtually. So when people stopped traveling to Africa, when people stopped being able to monitor things on the ground, uh, they got a bigger setback than the rest of the world that adapted to virtual modes and keeping up the momentum otherwise. What is it that will catalyze growth in future? That hasn't changed. So, they still have the richest minerals, the richest resources, uh, a large population. Uh, Costs are far lower. I mean, costs even in China and India have escalated over the past few years, but Africa still has a lower cost base. They have a very good geographic proximity to the major markets. And where they have lost out, as I said, is that over 2 years, basically nothing happened. But the core reasons why Africa should be a powerhouse in future have not changed. The only thing is that they're behind the curve, right? And people, when they lose confidence, it takes them some time to get back. So it's not, in a developed economy or in a scenario which is highly automated, things get better the next day, people are back, right? In a place where technology is still a little bit behind of the curve, physical presence is more important. Uh, it takes some time for people to come back to being comfortable, into moving into those territories and really accelerating again. So yes, I think Africa will still take some time because of these factors, but is it a continent of the future? I have absolutely no doubt.
Thank you. I think we're all be looking forward to it and actually having collaborations with Africa in that matter. Then, I'll move on to the next one, and then we'll have one last question right after that. The question is, how can freight forwarder companies forecast order demand, delivery processes, and how and where to store inventory?
Okay, so I think that again we have to, logistics is a very, very large world, right? Freight forwarding is part of it, and freight forwarding normally refers to the international movement of goods, and storage and inventory is more linked with warehousing, the 3PL, the 4PL aspects of it, right? Uh, the answer to all this is really the whole. Uh, First of all, what are we really looking for? So, are we looking for trends in shipping, trends in pricing, which is more related with the freight forwarding segment? Now, that has to do a lot with data analytics. And what we have been doing in C.H. Robinson, we've actually come up with a tool called Predictive IQ, right, which helps address precisely these kind of data analytics to see how markets are trending, where is there going to be congestion, where are shipping routes easing, for example. Okay. The second part of it, which is more inventory related and managing inventory and and stocking, has to do more with the 3PL, 4PL warehousing and distribution kind of systems, where the industry has for a long time actually been evolving technology to basically address these needs of the customers. So again, I think data analytics is the way forward. It will touch every aspect of the supply chain. Uh, it does have its implications because none of these things come cheap. So, to deliver them, there will definitely have to be companies of a certain scale in the business. Uh, so you will see again that a consolidation, if you like, of companies, because the small to medium players, they have always got a place in our marketplace because they provide personalized services and they render very good specialized shore services in the countries that they are, but they actually lack the scale to be able to invest and evolve into this level of analytics. So I think that that's going to happen. You're going to have bigger players in the marketplace investing in technology, providing the new requirements and meeting the new needs of the industry. And everybody's who's can look at it from that aspect has been investing in this for some time and trying to be ahead of the curve. And we at Robinsons are certainly doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Thapar. I just wanted to ask before I move on to the next question. You spoke of how your technology can actually assess the congestions which are there in the shipping industry. So, as far as I remember, last year, thousands of container ships were waiting for a place to dock in front of the coasts of North America, Europe, and Asia. So, what does this mean? So, I mean, how do you manage such a situation?
So I think, again, there are two different things. One is being able to assess a situation before it happens, right? The other is, can we really manage it, right? Now, what happened last year and is something that no individual forwarding company could effectively control, right? Because it was driven by much larger factors than that can be influenced by any individual logistics organization. What it does help in is, number one, communication, so that there's options available to the customer that, look, this is a problem. We may not be able to solve it, but can we find alternative routings? Can we find a different way? Maybe, if you have a delivery cycle, which is based on the fact that a vessel will take 35 days from point A to point B, you need to factor in the fact that it might be actually 75 days before the goods reach because the vessel is going to sit 15 or 20 days waiting for a berth. And then the pile up of this is going to be that, the port handling or the end delivery by trucks will also be impacted by the same congestion and cycle. Now, can you afford 75 days or do you want to air freight, for example, right? What is the difference of cost between waiting for 75 days and this will vary from commodity to commodity, product to product, to just paying for a chartered aircraft and getting it there. Example, right? Uh, It also helps us anticipate that the next leg of movement, which could be inland delivery, right? How do we actually plan that? If we know that a vessel is going to sit 15, 20 days in port because of the congestion, there's no point us booking trucks based on the original ETA, because that is only going to lead to a situation where the freight doesn't turn up. There are dead freight costs that have to be paid by the customer. And then when we actually need the equipment, it's not available because we have wasted it in the past. So this does not solve any problem on the larger level, but it does give options because you know what's coming to be able to mitigate the problem and at least be able to offer alternatives. With them, of course, it's an individual choice of the customer depending on their scenario and where they place their costs and their options as to whether they want to or are able to avail of those options or not.
Interesting. Thank you. I'll just move on to the last question before we end, and thank you so much for your time. The question is, how will NLP impact your market?
Too early to say. As I said, it's just a policy announcement. It has not even been, interpreted yet or made into an action plan. But as I did say earlier, in concept, it's extremely encouraging because it recognizes the need for having a common platform, right, where different forms of tech basically can talk to each other. That's, I think, the basic problem today in our country. If there are basic problems with our logistics, they can be really, consolidated into two or three issues. One is the constant issue of infrastructure. If we really look at it, a lot of work being done now on the national highway projects and the corridors, but still very far away from where it is in the developed world or in other larger markets like China. So goods need to move faster by road, then you need to have better roads to begin with. It's a no-brainer, right? Ports, still very limited capacity to handle the big vessels. For a very long time, we've been talking about the geographic advantages that ports like Kochi have. Why can't they become a hub or a transshipment hub? But we talk about Dubai, we talk about Singapore. They are very, very progressive in the logistics arena. But if you look at Colombo, other than the fact that they had different problems recently, but they were far ahead of the curve. So Colombo can do it, but a Kochi can't because we've not really moved, right, in that direction. Nagpur was talked about as a hub, and maybe it was driven by just the geographic fact that it's the center of India. But the fact is we don't have an airline hub today, and what prevents us? If Dubai can be an air cargo hub, Singapore can be an air cargo hub, why did we not develop any airport in India to do so? So I think we are way behind the curve in those kind of decisions where hopefully the NLP will help bring some focus. Third area, regulations, right? Everywhere in the world, you try to decongest ports and airports by having private bonded facilities where logistics players can actually build containers, build ULDs, etc. Happens to some extent in sea freight because you have an ICD, CFS, factory stuffing kind of environment, but still subject to lots of permissions. Aircraft, non-existent. So you have airports sitting in the middle of a city, example, Bombay. You can't expand it by 6 inches on either side because you'll go into an area that's politically sensitive to touch, maybe. But you cannot decongest. So how do you handle the cargo? Maybe COVID was a nice breather from that perspective, or you would have had incidents because the airport was so congested and there was no way to handle the cargo, right? So if we do not liberalize regulations and learn to go off-site, which the world did 30, 40 years ago, right, then regulations is another bottleneck. And the last bottleneck is this fragmented technology and these, respective packages that everybody picks up just to address the situation today, but we don't talk to each other. So I think that the NLP, if it addresses these areas, if it comes up with really, and that's what it's intended to, I believe, come up with a policy that accelerates the infrastructure, tackles the regulations, and brings everyone onto a common technology platform. Not us, but the whole supply chain ecosystem will benefit from that. And it's actually overdue and much needed.
Thank you, Mr. Thapar, and thank you for summarizing all your pointers. It makes it easier for actually understand what lies ahead exactly for the logistics industry and the freight forwarders in our country. On that note, such an insightful and engaging session, and a privilege to hear you. Our guest and I have been hooked on till the end, and I've taken home several nuggets from this. And thank you also to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the end and for sharing excellent questions. I'm sorry, but I just saw that there's another question by Mr. Nair. If I could just take one more minute of your time.
So I would also offer you, Gautam, that if we run out of time and if people have questions, I'd be happy to receive them on email and answer them later.
Surely. So what I can do is I can just take this question. I'll share this over mail to you, and
Yeah.
and I'll have your thoughts in, and I'll share the same with Mr. Nair over mail.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much once again.
Thanks to everybody for this very patient hearing. I'm a little passionate about the topic, so I tend to go on and on. Do apologies for that.
No, it was lovely hearing you as well. So I don't see that we went overboard at all. Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Bye for now. Have a good day, everyone, and a good weekend.
You too.